3 years ago, I almost bought a plane that I absolutely loved. The numbers looked reasonable, the paint looked beautiful, the seller seemed honest, and for a moment, I believed I had found the perfect airplane. But something felt off. So, instead of buying it, I sold the plane I already owned. And that decision probably saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars. Today, I want to explain why. Because many people entering aviation, especially those later in life, assume that buying an airplane is the hard part. It's not. The real challenge is knowing when owning an airplane no longer makes sense. And if you miss that moment, things can get expensive very quickly. Let's talk about the moment I realized it was time to sell. At the time, I was flying a very familiar aircraft to many private pilots, a Piper PA-28 Cherokee. Not glamorous, not fast, but dependable. If you've spent any time around general aviation airports in North America or Europe, you've probably seen dozens of them parked on the ramp. The Piper PA-28 Cherokee is simple, forgiving, and relatively affordable. And that's exactly why so many people start there. In fact, a lot of pilots also consider the Cessna 172 Skyhawk or even a Cessna 150 as their first ownership airplane. These airplanes are not about status. They're about access. Access to the sky, access to freedom, access to a lifelong hobby. And for a while, that's exactly what my Cherokee gave me. Weekend flights, lunch trips to small airports, quiet mornings above the clouds. But something slowly started changing. Not with the airplane, with my life. At first, the signs were subtle. Flights became less frequent. Weather windows didn't line up with my schedule. Maintenance started creeping up. And when you own an airplane, time matters almost as much as money. Because airplanes don't like sitting. Engines need to run. Systems need to move. Fuel systems need circulation. An airplane that flies regularly is often healthier than one that sits quietly in a hangar. And that's when I started noticing something uncomfortable. My airplane was becoming a hangar ornament. Now, here's where things get interesting. Many people assume the next step is upgrading. You start looking at faster aircraft, maybe something like the Mooney M20U Ovation Ultra, or a sleek cross-country machine like the Cirrus SR-22. Maybe even something more capable like the Cessna 210 Centurion. And trust me, that temptation is real, because aviation has a way of pulling you deeper. First, it's a trainer, then a traveling machine, then maybe a pressurized aircraft like the Piper PA-46 Malibu. And suddenly, you're browsing listings for turboprops like the Pilatus PC-12. This progression happens slowly, but it happens. Let me pause here for a moment, because I'm curious about something. If you're watching this video and thinking about buying your first airplane, what aircraft are you considering right now? Is it something simple like a Cessna 150? A practical traveler like a Cessna 182 Skylane? Or are you dreaming bigger? Maybe a Cirrus SR-22? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and the discussions under these videos are often just as valuable as the video itself. Aviation decisions are rarely simple, and hearing different perspectives helps everyone. Back to the story. One afternoon, I visited a local airport cafe. Every pilot knows the type. Coffee that's slightly too strong, windows overlooking the runway, and a few retired pilots who have been flying longer than most of us have been alive. We started talking. Eventually, the conversation turned to airplane ownership, and one of them said something I'll never forget. He said, "The worst airplane you can own is the one you don't fly." That sentence stuck with me because it was exactly what was happening. My Cherokee wasn't the problem. My usage was. So I started running the numbers. Hangar rent, insurance, annual inspection, unexpected repairs, engine reserve. Even with a relatively simple aircraft like a Piper PA-28 Cherokee or Cessna 172 Skyhawk, ownership costs add up quickly. And when the airplane flies 100 hours a year, those numbers make sense. But when it flies 20 hours, suddenly each flight becomes extremely expensive. That's when the idea first crossed my mind. Maybe it was time to sell. But selling a plane is emotional. Aviation isn't like owning a car. Airplanes become part of your identity. You remember every trip, every landing, every moment of silence above the clouds. Selling that aircraft felt like closing a chapter. And for a few weeks, I hesitated. Then something happened that made the decision very clear. A friend invited me on a flight in his Diamond DA-40 Star. Beautiful airplane, modern avionics, Smooth handling, efficient engine. And during that flight, I realized something surprising. I still loved flying, but I didn't necessarily need to own the airplane. Flying clubs, partnerships, rentals. There are many ways to stay in aviation without carrying the full financial weight of ownership. And for many pilots, especially those flying fewer than 50 hours per year, those options make a lot more sense. This is something that isn't talked about enough. Aviation culture often pushes ownership as the ultimate goal, but the reality is more nuanced. Sometimes owning a Cessna 182 Skylane or Beechcraft Bonanza G36 makes perfect sense. Sometimes it doesn't, and recognizing that difference can save you a fortune. Now, let's fast forward a little. About 2 months after that realization, I listed my airplane. Within a few weeks, it was sold. And I felt something unexpected. Relief, not regret. Relief. Because suddenly, the pressure disappeared. No hangar bill, no surprise maintenance calls, no worrying about the next annual inspection. And interestingly enough, I actually started flying more, just not in my own airplane. Some weeks I flew a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, other times a Diamond DA-40 Star, once even a Cirrus SR-22. Different airplanes, different experiences, but the same sky. And that's when I realized something important. Aviation is about flying, not necessarily owning. Now I want to ask you something, and this is a conversation worth having. If you already own an airplane, have you ever thought about selling it? Not because something is wrong with the aircraft, but because your flying habits changed. Write your thoughts in the comments. A lot of people quietly struggle with this decision. Sharing experiences can help others avoid expensive mistakes. Before we finish, let's talk about the moment when selling becomes the smartest move. In my experience, there are 3 major signals. First, your airplane flies less than 40 hours per year. Second, maintenance surprises start causing stress rather than excitement. And third, you find yourself dreaming about flying, but not actually doing it. When those 3 things line up, it might be time to reconsider ownership. Not aviation, just ownership. And remember, some of the happiest pilots I know don't own airplanes at all. They fly club aircraft, they split costs, they rent when the weather is perfect, and they walk away when it isn't. Meanwhile, some owners are buried under maintenance bills for aircraft they rarely fly. The sky doesn't care who owns the airplane. It only cares that you show up. Today, I still fly whenever I can. Sometimes a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, sometimes a Diamond DA-40 Star, and occasionally something faster like a Cirrus SR-22. But I no longer feel trapped by ownership. And that's the real reason I sold my plane before it was too late. If you enjoyed this story, let me ask you one more question before you go. What airplane do you think is the smartest aircraft to own for someone flying under 60 hours per year? Would you choose something simple like a Cessna 150? A practical traveler like a Piper PA-28 Cherokee? Or something more advanced like a Cirrus SR-22? Tell me in the comments. These conversations are what make the aviation community so valuable. And who knows, your experience might help someone else make the right decision before it's too late.